Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about the tandem read, Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. I would totally recommend doing these two books as a tandem read. I think it really enhanced my overall experience. The guide I use, not sure what it's called, maybe I'll put like some screenshots on the screen if I can figure out how, but the guide I used was really good. It kind of grouped the action together really nicely, but it was really well planned out. We had really good groups of chapters around the pivotal action moments. This helped because it wasn't overly frustrating. Like if we had a big battle scene in Empire of Storms, for example, we didn't, cut between the two books too much. We would stick with that for a little bit. Same goes for Tower of Dawn. If we had something like exciting going on, we would stick with it for like 4 or 5 chapters and then switch back. There were times when it felt like a bit of an interruption and you wanted to stick with the same book, but when you switched it kind of enhanced the experience rather than took away from it. There was a lot of reference in Tower of Dawn to things happening in Empire of Storms. The books happen at exactly the same time, although Empire of Storms occurs like first in the series. I do think that if you're going to read them not tandem one after the other, a lot of people say, read Tower of Dawn except for the epilogue because that will spoil Empire of Storms, and then read Empire of Storms because it's really action packed, it ends in a cliffhanger and you're going to want to go straight into Kingdom of Ash. But Tower of Dawn does reference things going on in, the continent of Empire of Storms that would spoil it if you read it first, so I don't think that's very good advice. For example, and we're going to get into spoiler territory, near the beginning of Empire of Storms, the witches attack and take over Rifthold and the Glass Cancel, and Dorian's forced to go on the run. In Tower of Dawn they find out this round about the same time, and Chaol and Nesryn are really anxious about Dorian and Nesryn's family, and so yeah, it kind of completely spoils that plot point, and there's a couple of things like that throughout Tower of Dawn that are spoilers as well. There's another moment in Tower of Dawn where, it's not really a big deal in Tower of Dawn, but because you know what's happening in Empire of Storms, it becomes a big deal to the reader. This is where we know, because we're reading both books, that Aelin and her friends are in Skulls Bay, even though it's a really unlikely place for her to be. And Chaol, thinking, Skulls Bay is probably the last place Aelin would be, tells the princess in Tower of Dawn that Aelin is going to be there because he's trying to give away some free information that's not actually going to damage Aelin. However, he's actually giving her the truth, unbeknownst to him. Another good moment where it's good to switch between the two books is where we have Aelin and her cadre battling with Maeve back in Empire of Storms. We have Nesryn in the Spider's Den and learning the truth about Maeve, that she's actually a Valg. And that changes how you view the events of Empire of Storms. It changes how you view Maeve's behaviour, and at the end, massive spoilers here, when she captures Aelin, we the reader know, shit, she's a Valg. Whereas if you only read Empire of Storms and then read Tower of Dawn next, you're not going to know that. You will get the information fresh for Kingdom of Ash, where you're going into her being in Maeve's clutches. However, you're not going to know just how much of a disaster it is at the time. For that reason, I really recommend doing the tandem read, but it was overwhelming. I did enjoy having the guide and ticking off all of the boxes because God knows I love ticking boxes off. But it did feel a little bit like a chore and homework, and I was okay, well, I'll make this progress today and maybe I'll finish this line and be on to the 4th, line of listed chapters tomorrow, and putting the books side by side and being okay, I've actually read this much and I've actually got this much more to go. I did feel like I was counting the book down a little bit, and also when I was going to my boyfriend's house, wanting to travel and take the books with me, it was annoying having to cart 2 around. So I wouldn't recommend that if you want to go and read your book on the train. I can also imagine it being really annoying if you're doing the audiobook or doing a Kindle book. But as long as you've got the physical book and you're at home and you've got your little guide, it's a fun time. Now let's get into talking about the individual books a little bit. Empire Storms was an action-packed, thrilling ride. It was very Pirates of the Caribbean, the cover has the ocean on it and the sea dragon tail, and that's pretty much where they were. They were on the sea for a lot of it. They kind of went down the coast to Skulls Bay and then all the way around to Yoe, where there was like a big naval battle. In fact, there's kind of like 2 sea battles. So it was very Pirates of the Caribbean. We got some big shocking reveals near the end about Aelin and that she has to sacrifice herself to forge the lock. We learn a lot more about Elena and her fate as well. There's also a lot of good romance in the book. We've got Aelin and Rowan forming their connection, like deepening their connection. We've got Edion and Lysandra forming a bit of a connection, also her becoming like more badass, really mastering her shifting skills, turning into sea dragons and wyverns and everything. We have some family drama between Gabrielle and Edion as they get to know each other as well, and we're introduced to Fenris a little bit more, who becomes quite a cool character. And then we've got a whole lot of the plot line with Lorcan. I keep calling him Lochran. Didn't realise until the end of this book this name's actually Lorcan, so I've had to change that in my brain, which is very annoying. But we have a good, cute romance between Lorcan and Elide, which I really liked, and I loved seeing Elide kind of come into her own using her skills of lying and deception, and seeing her like through Lorcan's eyes. I liked seeing him go from, you know, kind of an asshole to, you know, being a bit of a softie, but just for her, which is nice. And we also got kind of a good start of a romance between Dorian and Manon, and it was cool to see Manon like leave her grandmother, even though it was in tatters, and come and join Aelin and our gang and be part of that storyline, start to make a real change in her life. There was lots of good callbacks to Assassin's Blade. We've got the return of Captain Rolfe in Skulls Bay, but we also, towards the end of the book, have the return of Ansel coming to be an ally, and the Silent Assassins also coming to assist Aelin. Moving over to Tower of Dawn, we have another callback to Assassin's Blade. We have the return of Yrene, who is a really cool character, a healer. She's become very, you know, talented and skilled at healing, and she's tasked with healing Kael. And this is a bit of an enemies to lovers arc because she's got a lot of like resentment, not just resentment, like pure trauma because of our darling and their empire, and you know, the trauma that put her through in her youth. So her and Kael start working together. They start out as sort of enemies, and then we have a really nice romantic arc for them throughout the course of the book. This is a slower paced book. I think a lot of people that read Tower of Dawn as a standalone after Empire of Storms, you know, it felt like it was interrupting the action a little bit, which I can see why, because we go into Kingdom of Ash and it's just pure action again. But I thought it was a nice breather, and that's why I liked doing a tandem, because interspersed with the kind of drama and action of Empire of Storms, we had this like cute rom-com in which there's also a lot of like secrets revealed and mystery and, you know, really monumental information revealed. Complements the other story really well, and it's great to open up the world, meet new characters, see a whole new culture. It was very Game of Thrones Essos coded. I feel like we had the Dothraki horse lords, and we had, you know, Marine and like these other cultures that you see in Game of Thrones, except the culture here and the empire here is a lot more progressive and is deemed as kind of a positive force rather than an oppressive one. I guess it shows an empire in its prime where it kind of works for the people, I suppose. I also liked Nesrin's storyline as she gets to know Sartak, has a bit of a romance with him, and learns to ride rooks and become just a total badass, go out into the world and explore and get answers. This yielded some cool battle scenes as well with the spiders, which was good and added a little bit of extra to this novel that it needed to not just be a chill, quiet time. I also liked the politics in this novel. I thought the concept that all of the siblings were competing to be heir and that this could turn deadly was quite interesting. I wanted to see a bit more of that, but it didn't really come to fruition. It kind of ended fairly peacefully, and I expected there to be more internal fighting. I liked that all the siblings were very distinct and had their own characters. I kind of pictured them like the Martells in Game of Thrones. I pictured Pedro Pascal, as I normally do. I just cast him and everything in my head. I kind of casted him as Aragorn. I know Oberyn Martell is like much more of a positive character. He's flawed, but he's like a good guy deep down. And Aragorn is kind of an asshole, but I thought Pedro like would play him in that Oberyn Martell way pretty well, pretty crafty. And I casted his lover, can't remember her name, Illyrio or Martell or something like that. The mother, the kind of mother of all of the Sand Snakes, Oberyn's children. I casted her as the Princess Cesar because like they're both lesbian, kind of bisexual vibes, and she's kind of a harsh character in Game of Thrones. I thought she was a good casting for Hazar. Sartak, I kind of pictured like Khal Drogo with like his long hair, his long braided hair, and I didn't picture anyone from Game of Thrones to be Cashin or Duva because that was enough Game of Thrones. I also like learning more about the healers, the Tor. I loved that they had these pools underneath the Tor and every healer had their own bell. I thought that was cool world building. I also liked that the library had all of these basset cats. I think like these are cool details that make for really good world building, make it seem like a real place. I also like Kale's arc. We get to learn more about his past as he overcomes his inner demons, overcomes his physical injury that's kind of a spiritual injury. And I like the twist at the end that just as he is like fully healed, he ends up in a state of like semi-healed, semi-not. He ends up in a position where he is partially disabled still, but still able to walk, and his life force is kind of tied to Yrene and her magic. I thought that was a good decision from a writing standpoint because throughout the course of the novel he's struggling with, you know, his new physical disability and struggling with his masculinity and physically and emotionally about it, trying to come to terms with it, and he does. He kind of learns to cope with it. He learns to not be ashamed. He learns to fight in different ways on horseback, ride without the use of his legs, and you know, it would have been easy to just heal him and be like, oh cool, he's fine now and he can walk again. But it's cool that by the end, even though it's quite tragic that he is not fully healed and that he's still going to have to use his wheelchair, still going to have struggles, because he's emotionally developed and he's come to terms with his disability, he's not viewing it as a disability anymore. He's viewing it just as a part of him that he has to deal with, and you know, he's happy to do so because of what it means for Yrene. We see that he can still be himself and he can still be badass and a competent fighter even when he's having to deal with having a cane or being in a chair or being on a horse. And I think that's probably nice representation for people that have disabilities who maybe aren't in a chair every day, or you know, struggle from day to day, or maybe they're in a chair all the time. I think if you are someone that lives in a wheelchair and you're reading this book about a guy that gets healed and can walk again, that would be like a bit frustrating, especially when that's your reality. So I think, you know, having him come to accept and even like that part of himself is probably good. But I'm not handicapped or in a wheelchair, so I cannot really comment on the representation. If you are, let me know what you thought of it, if it was good representation for you or if it wasn't. That's it for my thoughts on the Empire of Storms Tower of Dawn tandem read. I would recommend doing the tandem read and not reading them in isolation. Overall, I enjoyed both books and all the big reveals. I think I maybe even enjoyed Tower of Dawn a little bit more. Maybe I would have enjoyed Empire of Storms more if I'd read it all at once and wasn't constantly interrupted, but I felt more attached to the love story in Tower of Dawn than I did to any of the love stories in Empire of Storms, except maybe Elide and Lorcan, which was cute as well. Let me know what you thought of both books in the comments below. Let me know if you did the tandem read and if you liked it or if you didn't. Just let's chat about it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like these videos, and tune in next time for another bookish chat. Thanks for watching. Bye!